evening and welcome to the Silicon Valley Entrepreneur, a series of conversations with startup founders and the investors that fund them. I'm Chris Gill, President and CEO of S-Phase, the largest and fastest growing not-for-profit for entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. This week I'm very pleased to have with me Steve Blank, founder of Epiphany, serial entrepreneur, author, and professor at Stanford, Berkeley, and I believe Cornell as well. Columbia, I beg your pardon. Steve, thank you very much for coming along, taking some time to do this.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Can you tell us a bit about your background and how you got from wherever it was you started to where you are now?
Sure, Chris. It's been an interesting ride. My background is I would consider a bit non-traditional, considering where I teach. I spent 4 years in the Air Force during Vietnam, and that's where I got my electronics training. And when I came back, I went back to school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and got sent out to a place called San Jose in California to bring up a computer system at a Ford Milpitas plant, which is now the Great Mall of America. And Silicon Valley back then wasn't really known outside of probably the Valley. So my plane ticket was booked to San Jose, Puerto Rico. And when we straightened that out, I got out here, found out there was a thriving electronics business, picked up a newspaper, and got a job. And then I just had to fly back and quit. So I started in 1978 in my first of 8 companies in Silicon Valley, which was a company called ESL, which was a military intelligence company, and then did my first semiconductor startup called Zilog, then a workstation company, Convergent Technologies, then a second semiconductor company called MIPS Computers, supercomputer company called Ardent, I think Supermac, Rocket Science, and then Epiphany. Mm-hmm. And I had a variety of roles, all the way from training instructor to marketing manager to VP of marketing to one stint proving out the Peter Principle as a president and CEO, and then back down to VP of marketing, where I was actually pretty good in that job. And then at the height of the internet bubble, I took the money off the table and went home and retired in 1999.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's about 10 years ago. There's a few more things have happened since then. And at some point during all that, something came up to do with lean startups. How did that come about?
Well, it's interesting. After 8 startups, you either automatically go into startup 9, or you have to sit down and be a little reflective and think about what's next. And my kids were fairly young then, and one of the things I did notice as I was working in startups was my mentors and people who I actually admired at work turned out to be terrible fathers and were never home. And I just consciously said I'd like to see my kids grow up and maybe not do startup 9 through 12, because there was no reason economically to have to do that again. Mm-hmm. So I was sitting and being a bit reflective of going through what did I learn. And I thought, well, like any retired guy, maybe I'll write my memoirs. And as I was collecting my thoughts, I realized a couple of things. One is I'd have to pay people to actually read them, and though now I'm blogging about them. So, but 2 is, and here's the part that seriously, the interesting thing is when I started writing about startup 1, 2, 3 through N, I realized that there were a set of patterns I've never realized when I was heads down in each company. Mm-hmm. And by the time I had retired, and even after now being retired a year or 2, sitting on other technology boards and giving advice to the VCs who had funded me, I noticed the patterns weren't only about the companies I was involved in, but these same things were occurring in other companies as well. Yet I had been in the Valley as an entrepreneur for 20 years and never heard this as common themes anywhere. You kind of knew that great VCs had great instincts and gut, who could predict, with a probability something's going to happen. Mm-hmm. But you never heard entrepreneurs talk about any patterns at all. There was nothing. And I wondered if I was just seeing things.
Okay, I have to say, that's one of the strangest things that entrepreneurs say to me. VCs, they're just doing pattern recognition.
Right.
Well, there's a good reason for that, isn't there?
Well, when there's a great IRR, that's all you appear to need. And great VCs really do have an instinctual model for the types of behaviors and the types of markets and the types of activities that worked historically for them. Up till 1997, that was a great business. And then in the internet bubble, it became a very different business. And in the post-bubble rubble, it was a very different business. That is, the VC industry, at least from an entrepreneur's perspective, went from an industry that taught entrepreneurs how to build profitable companies. That was, for the first 20 years, the VC model. I don't know if you knew, or if your audience knew, but up till 1997, you could not take a company public unless it had 5 profitable quarters. There was no law that said that, but no decent investment banker would touch your company because they knew there wasn't a market on Wall Street for an unprofitable technology company. And so, therefore, your investors on your board were teaching you the skills on how to understand customers, how to find them, and how to build revenue and profit. That changed in 1997. You know when? It was Netscape. Netscape IPO, and this isn't a negative comment about the company or the market or Marc Andreessen, who I think is a wonderful entrepreneur and venture capitalist, but it was about what happened in the marketplace. All of a sudden, there was a market for an unprofitable company who was telling you about the future and how great it was going to be in the next 10 years. And that was the beginning of the internet bubble, where in fact it became a bigger bubble than maybe the South Sea, bubble or the tulip bubble. And when that crashed, VCs then needed to find another model. And for the last 5 years, it had become the M&A model. We can't take your company public, but maybe we can merge it with something or sell it. And in the financial panic of 2008, that disappeared as well. So I kind of believe that entrepreneurs and startups need to go back to the fundamentals. And part of this thinking process was, what was it that it took to build profitable, repeatable companies? And that was kind of the genesis of this thinking, sitting there looking through patterns.
Okay, so tell us about the patterns that you've seen.
Sure.
Some of the things that work and some of the things that don't work. One of the ones that sticks out to me from your blog is the startup death spiral.
Sure. So the startup death spiral is just my description of how a typical company that goes wrong works. And whether it's a web company or not, is you attract an investor with a great idea or a great team. They tell you, yeah, let's swing for the fences. And if you're an engineering team, you start building the product. Why? Because it's your vision, and your VCs are, encouraging you to go out and get that product out the door. And eventually you hire a VP of sales who looks at the revenue plan and says, wow, here's first customer ship. I need to scale a sales force or a sales channel. You hire a VP of marketing who looks at the same plan and says, boy, for the sales people to make their revenue plan, I need to create demand by the time that launch happens. I need to hire an ad agency or a PR agency and get all the marketing buzz going. And first customer ship comes, and boom, you now have a staffed sales department, marketing department, product's been built, and then you wait. And the revenue plan keeps on calling for more revenue, and the sales department keeps staffing sales, and all of a sudden at the first board meeting post the launch, the board asks, how's it going? And the VP of sales says, what a great launch. And the VP of marketing goes, wonderful launch. Everybody nods and pats each other in the back, and the next month, how's it going? And the VP of sales this time says, great pipeline. And we're hiring to plan, and the marketing exec says, we're spending, look at all the demand we're creating. Great. How's revenue? Well, that pipeline looks great. And this conversation occurs maybe 2 months, 3 months, 4 months in a row, depending on the economy. And if it's a normal economy, not like today, but a normal economy, this might go on for 6 or 7 months, until one day the board members synchronize, one eyebrow raised. They go to school for this. They raise one eyebrow at the CEO and go, pipeline, what about revenue? Well, next board meeting, what about revenue? And all of a sudden, no one is sitting next to the VP of sales because the stench of death is surrounding them. Next board meeting, new VP of sales. The death spiral happens because you executed to a plan that had no basis in fact. You, in fact, only got customer feedback after first customer ship, after you loaded all the sales, marketing, and engineering expenses, and you only found out that customers didn't want the product till long after you've built into the expenses of engineering, sales, and marketing.
So, Steve, I understand about death spiral. It sounds pretty deadly. How does a startup avoid getting caught in the death spiral?
Well, Chris, the biggest thing is for an entrepreneur to understand that even though they've written a business plan and put all their hypotheses down in the plan, that's all they are, is hypotheses. And the real death spiral trap is thinking that and acting like those hypotheses are fact now that you've gotten funded. And in fact, that's where it all starts, is mistaking a business plan for a license to execute, rather than a license to say, wait a minute, this is my opinion, this is my vision, but is it a hallucination or is it a vision? and what I learned early on in my career, that there are no facts inside the building, that the facts actually exist outside the building. Yet most entrepreneurs spend all their planning meetings and strategy meetings and whatever with each other, when in fact the potential customers are sitting outside. So step one are for entrepreneurs to put their slides away and their plans away and their spreadsheets away and go out and talk to customers as they're building the product.
But hang on a minute. As a startup, you've just got funded on the basis of not maybe your whole business plan, but certainly your executive summary, the story you've told with your PowerPoint slides, and don't the VCs expect you to go and execute to that plan?
Well, you know, that is the curse of the death spiral. In fact, what the VCs would love to do is have a portfolio of 10 companies swinging for the fences. Historically, they'll know 8 or 9 of them will fail, and they'll make their money from the ones that, like through Brownian motion, happen to find the right pattern. My observation and contention is that instead of all swinging for the fences, you might actually want to go out and investigate where the customers are, and that we could reduce the infant mortality, that instead of having 8 or 9 out of 10 fail, we might have 6 or 7 succeed by actually understanding what's going on outside the building.
Okay, so rather than trying to particularly make a product that nobody wants and spend a huge amount of time and effort doing that, how do you go about getting to a business model and a product the customer actually wants?
So this is an iterative process, and at least the customer development part has 4 steps: customer discovery, customer validation, customer creation, and company scale. And that's the activity that happens outside the building. At the same time, engineering is using an agile development model that allows them to iterate rapidly rather than an 18-month waterfall development cycle like I grew up with in a software business. Literally today, startups on the net are releasing multiple times a day complete releases of software based on customer feedback. And now you've built this incredibly agile loop that's responsive and reflects input that literally was just heard. And it allows you to go out and discover what is it that our customers are saying are their biggest problems. What would they pay for? It allows you to validate by actually trying to get orders or users or whatever your business model calls for for success. And what you're looking for is that product market fit, that point at which you say more dollars or more marketing or more whatever will just drive us to scale. And so you're looking for that inflection point in scale. And you're doing that as a strategy rather than just throwing money in execution and hope.
So there are various seed-level startups now that focus a lot on getting a product done. Do you advocate that, or do you advocate going to talk to customers first?
So it's not an either or.
Okay.
So as I said, there are 2 components of what make up a lean startup: customer development, which is the part going on outside the building, and agile development, the rapid iteration part. And so in fact what you're doing to get a product done is very quickly get to a minimum feature set that you could test with a set of customers, and you're trying to discover what is that minimum feature set. So you're not just rapidly getting a product done in a vacuum, you're actually rapidly getting a product done with feedback in this entire loop. And this loop, that's the lean startup loop.
Okay.
And what you're looking for is, when does this catch fire? And in an internet or web-based business, you could find that out fairly quickly. Did it go viral? Is it sticky? Do we have scale? And if we're not going for a revenue model, are we getting users? Are we getting eyeballs? Or what were we looking for? Are people downloading trials? And we were iterating inside on that minimum feature set while we were outside the building, virtually or physically, trying to discover. The one comment I want to make is this discovery process can't be outsourced. By outsourced, I mean you can't hire an exec, VP of sales, VP of marketing, to go do this for a funny phenomenon of human nature. If you're a founder and your VP of sales comes back and says, Steve, the product's not selling, your instinct is not that the product has a problem. Your instinct is the head of sales has a problem.
Yep.
Now, let me tell you, if you're the founder and you go out and find out that no one's buying it, you can't play cognitive dissonance. You have to deal with the fact that people have looked you in the eye and said, your baby's ugly. Regardless of what you're going to do with this baby, it's ugly, I'm not going to buy it. And therefore, you have the authority and the ability to make changes on the spot. Whereas if somebody told you that, your first reaction is to be defensive of, oh no, I can't even comprehend changing our strategy or product. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's another trap that startups get into, is they immediately silo into, I'm hiring a head of sales and head of marketing, and therefore they're removing the people with the authority to make rapid changes into some organization just staffed by, quote, employees.
So this sounds like you could very quickly figure out not only whether to fund a company or not, but whether the company's going to be successful or not, based upon some very simple things that they do or don't do very early on.
And I don't want to make it too simple. This is not the panacea or the formula, and it is not the ultimate litmus test for a startup. The only claim I'd probably make is that this process probably reduces infant mortality of startups by some measurable percentage. And when I get comments from entrepreneurs saying, I don't believe it, I go, you know what, if you don't, it's okay, do whatever else you were going to do. The problem is not that this is the process. The problem is that after 30 years of entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley, the thing that just astonishes me is that there are no other methodologies for doing a rigorous view of an end-to-end process for early-stage startups. Almost all the academic research is focused on company growth for large corporations.
Yes.
And it makes a lot of sense because the people who buy and pay for consultants are large companies. No one in startups are hiring professors to go do consulting.
Now, we had on the show a couple of months ago Randy Komisar, who just came out with a book, Getting to Plan B, where he talks about something that, okay, the plan that you go with to the VC is almost never the plan that you exit with. It's completely different. Is this the same sort of thing?
Sure, but this is how to get through plan from A to G. So I kind of remind my students that no business plan ever survives first contact with customers.
Is that right?
Well, it never does. It's the military's analogy. No war plan ever survives contact with the enemy. This is the same thing. You could do all these great plans and theories about how customers are going to behave. Well, unless you're mailing a copy of your business plan with every iteration of your product, they don't get to read your plan. So what you find is in every great startup, what are called pivot points. Points where you realize that your initial assumptions about customer or business model or minimum feature set really is completely wrong. But at least in this process, you get to learn that cheaply, inexpensively, and quickly. And it's these pivots that actually get you to product market fit. Very few companies end up as the same company they had in their plan. And I think this is Randy's point.
Yes,
right?
Very much so.
And so it's not only getting to plan B, my point is it's how do you rapidly and quickly embrace a process where this isn't just random chaos, it's these pivots are actually part of a strategy, and that you're going to find out how to do this by letting customers and feedback teach you this rather than run out of money and have to fire people.
Now, this sounds like when you are pitching a VC or an angel for money, that the pitch should be very different from what it currently is.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Sure. I've done this a couple of times when I used to take startups into VCs, and I call this a lessons learned venture pitch.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of talking about customer development or agile development or lean startups, that would be like evangelizing a religion.
Mm-hmm.
What you really want to show a venture capitalist or investor is the results of the religion, not the religion, because you only have 45 minutes. What you really want to tell them is, I contend, a heretical story. What you really want to prove to them is you're a team that knows how to learn, have actually iterated on your own nickel or someone else's, and you've actually found out about products and customers and markets in a way that no amount of just pure cash would have done. And so the way I kind of structure VC pitches is, here's the opportunity, and then a set of, here's what we learned, here's what we thought, and then here's what we did slides. And literally going in and saying, hey, here's what was our initial assumption. So here's what we did. And then here are the results. Oh, and then here's what we found. And then showing a couple of those loops, hopefully with a little graph that shows goodness increasing.
Yep.
And you walk into a VC with that kind of pitch,
right.
About 25% of the time, they'll just throw you out the door because it doesn't meet any of their standard models. But about 3/4 of the time, they'll be sitting there going, well, they checked the box on a team that could learn. They checked the box in understanding customers. They checked, well, this is my standard presentation, but I've learned a lot here just as an investor.
This makes so much sense to me. I read about 500 to 600 executive summaries every year, and I have to say that would make a whole lot more sense to me.
And the reason why you don't see that when you read 500 executive summaries is you can't fake it. That is, I could fake a business plan. Hey, here's my idea, here's the size of the market, here's whatever. You can't fake lessons learned. Lessons learned truly is, I've been outside the building, working my butt off, talking to customers, iterating the product, etc. If you try to do a lessons learned pitch, you truly had to be out there doing the deal. And that's very different. That just raises the bar. And I think, think of it almost as a uranium enrichment facility. If we could get entrepreneurs not only building prototypes, but essentially building customer model prototypes as well, and then you bring those to be to investors, you've really raised everybody's bar. We're not just now funding ideas, we're funding ideas that have been battle tested at least to the first level.
Right. So is it are you going now, if you've done all this on your own nickel, are you going now to the VC just for the expansion funding because you proved it all out, or are you going to say, and what I'm going to do with your money is prove or disprove these final two questions?
Right. And so this is the classic business school answer is, it depends.
Okay.
And it really depends. If you remember, we take for granted that entrepreneurship is a single business model. But in fact, we could be building anything from Web 2.0, browser-based whatever, to, we're building a new silicon architecture. They're not the same. Their capital requirements are dramatically different. Their time to market is dramatically different. So let's just take the web for a second. My friend Mike Maples likes to say 500 grand is the new 5 million.
Oh, yeah.
In that you truly, and maybe now 50 grand is the new 500 grand. The point is that with very little cash, you could actually build a company not only through discovery, but into validation and potentially product market fit with just $500,000. And then all you would need is money for scale and expansion, etc. If you're building a semiconductor or hardware company, 500 grand might take you into, well, we talked to a couple guys and we bought the test equipment. So it really depends on, first question ought to be, what's our business model and what's our market? And everything today seems to be, the answer seems to be web, and I think this model is more broadly applicable to just web. The only thing it doesn't work for is biotech, because a real interesting filter here is a customer development and lean startup model solves the, do you have customer and market risk? Let's try to reduce that problem.
Right.
In biotech, you don't have customer and market risk, not till maybe year 15. What you have at first is pure technology risk. does this darn thing work outside of the lab, and can we get it through FDA trials? And I have a science problem for the first 15 years. Trying to do customer development or lean startup is kind of silly. Though most other industries have some combination of technology and customer and market risk. So, for example, if you're doing a new CPU or chip, you have technology risk in trying to make sure the architecture works, but eventually you have customer and market risk to see if anybody will design in the product. First, you have to solve the technology risk, but you also have to address the customer and market risk. Does that make sense?
Yep.
In a web startup, unless it's some real new architecture, with all due respect to my software friends, it's truly a customer and market risk problem. There really is very little technology invention. I'm not saying the technology is easy, but the invention part, not much. And therefore, a lean startup or customer development methodology is really applicable here.
Okay. There's a huge lot more I'd love to talk about. Unfortunately, we're out of time. It's gone past all far too quickly. Is the one last 30-second pearls of wisdom you could give to our viewers?
You know, you could read about this, you could hear about it, but entrepreneurship and customer development and lean startups is a hands-on game. You need to get out of the building, take your passion and your vision and your energy and start talking to customers.
Terrific. Steve, thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure having you here. There's a whole lot more we could talk about, but unfortunately I haven't got the time.
Thank you for your time, Chris.
So thank you, and good evening from the Silicon Valley Entrepreneur, and look forward to seeing you again next month.